Sling and Things.
Sup, y'all, and welcome to Sling and Things, the YouTube review series that kinda sounds like the name of a store in a video game that would sell bows and arrows. Today, I'm reviewing a movie that once upon a time I considered one of my all-time favorite thrillers, if I can continue the trend of stuff I've been reviewing lately. It was a movie I watched multiple times back in the day, but because of circumstances surrounding the movie that I will soon get into, circumstances that I wasn't aware of at the time, I had not seen this movie in over a decade, and I'm not sure that I can even recommend it now, at least without massive reservations. The film that I am discussing today is The Ghost Rider from 2010, which stars Ewan McGregor and Pierce Brosnan, and is not to be confused with Ghost Rider, the goofy Nicolas Cage movie about Johnny Blaze that was released around the same time. In this movie, McGregor's character is a ghostwriter who gets assigned with finishing the memoir of the ex-Prime Minister of Britain, who is played by Brosnan. But he only gets the job because the previous ghostwriter for the assignment suspiciously drowned to death. And over the course of the movie, McGregor's character learns that he's in the middle of a situation larger than he could have imagined, which forces him to unravel the mystery of his predecessor's death and the conspiracy surrounding the former Prime Minister. Every now and then, I'll watch a film that'll make me wonder if it was based off a novel, and The Ghost Rider definitely did that. It is a very pulpy movie. It feels like the kind of solo protagonist story that you might pick up while you're at an airport, or that you might finish while you're on vacation. And that's because it is. This is an adaptation of a story called The Ghost that was written by a man named Robert Harris, who incidentally co-wrote the screenplay of this movie too. What I love the most about The Ghost Rider is its atmosphere. The whole movie is shot with this gray, drizzly backdrop. There isn't a single scene in the movie where it isn't overcast, or where it doesn't look like it's about to rain. The film does a really excellent job of conveying the loneliness of being a ghostwriter. Writing is a rather isolating profession to begin with. It's one that forces you to stay indoors by yourself for long stretches of time. But if you're a ghostwriter, you don't even get the adulation of people celebrating your work when you're done. You're just an afterthought throughout the entire process. And in the movie, McGregor's character doesn't even have a name. No one in the movie bothers to learn who he is. That's how temporary his importance is to these people. And little details like that help build up the drama, because when he gets into trouble later in the movie, when the plot starts to thicken, you really do get the sense that he is totally expendable, that because of his job, there's almost no one he can turn to, and that almost no one will miss him even if something happens to him. And yet, despite having such a gloomy backdrop, the ghostwriter manages to avoid feeling morbid and depressing by having a very quirky soundtrack. The score was done by a prolific French composer named Alexandre Desplat, and it manages to be whimsical and upbeat while also being suspenseful. It reminds me a lot of the score for The Third Man, which was a post-World War II movie that had zither music playing the whole time, and which was excellent in case you've never seen it. It gives the film a very distinct, very unique thumbprint, and I found that even though I hadn't watched this in like 10 years, many of the film's musical cues were still ingrained in my memory. The Ghost Rider just sounds different than pretty much every other thriller you could compare this to, which goes a long way in making it memorable, if this is the kind of movie that you'd see. One issue with the movie, though, is that it does the thing that political films do sometimes, where they create fictional politicians and fictional scandals, and they try to get you invested in them, even though you know they're not real. So, in this movie, Brosnan's character is called Adam Lang, and he is very much a substitute for Tony Blair, who was the actual Prime Minister of Britain in the early 2000s. Even the controversies surrounding Lang in the movie are similar to ones that surrounded Blair. The issue, though, is that while those allegories may have made sense to the people who watched this when it first came out, if you don't know or care who Tony Blair was now, you might not have much of a connection to the political ecosystem of this movie. You might be confused why some of these events are as mammoth as the film claims that they are. The Ghost Rider is based on the politics of the early 2000s, and the further we get from that time period, the harder it might be to follow along and care about some of these political scenes. Outside of those moments, however, the movie is very well crafted. It drags a little bit. If you're looking for non-stop action, you should look elsewhere. But it's a good thriller. It's the kind of film that you could watch with your parents and still enjoy, so long as your parents can tolerate a little bit of profanity. Brosnan and McGregor are both excellent in this, and it also has a solid cast of supporting characters, such as Tom Wilkinson and Kim Cattrall and Olivia Williams. It even features a cameo from Eli Wallach, who was 94 when this film came out, and who you might know as Tuco from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is another film you should definitely see if you haven't already. So yeah, as a fellow writer and as a fan of slowish movies, which you should know by now, I dug The Ghost Rider quite a bit. I watched it multiple times on TV 10 years ago, and I liked the film so much that after my second viewing of it, I decided that I would wait to see the end credits so that I could see who directed it, which is something I didn't used to do. But I don't know, I just really dug the vibe of this movie. It just really connected with me. I wanted to see what else this director had made, since I figured, hey, I'd probably be into that too. So the movie ends, and I'm waiting to see who the director is, and then the credits pop up, and in black letters on a white background, the words appear, a Roman Polanski film. And the moment I read that, my heart just plummeted. I was mortified to learn that I had unknowingly watched a Polanski film. Because Roman Polanski was a pedophile and a rapist. In the 1970s, he drugged and raped a 13-year-old girl, and then, when it became clear that he was going to go to jail for that, he fled the United States and spent the rest of his life on the run, making movies in countries that wouldn't extradite him. He was a truly despicable person, and it was deflating and shameful to learn that I had indulged in a creation of his, and that I hadn't just enjoyed it, I had specifically gone out of my way to find out who made it so that I could watch more of their stuff. But after learning who had directed this, I didn't watch The Ghost Rider again until now. I had no desire to. And if I'm being completely honest, if I hadn't started this YouTube series that allows me to explore complicated subject matter, I probably wouldn't have brought myself to ever see it again. The thing with separating art from the artist is that no one wants to do it. Even if you can compartmentalize good work from a bad person, we'd all prefer to not have to do it in the first place. It's so much more convenient to believe that our favorite creators aren't so flawed or so complicated that we need to make moral concessions over them. And it becomes this terrible exercise where if you do decide to abstain from people's work because of their past, it's tough to do it consistently. It's like this endless game of whack-a-mole, because we can never really know if the people who make our favorite stuff are actually good people. We like to convince ourselves that they're all okay, but we don't know. And if and when we do find out that someone we liked was bad, it's natural to go through the process of rationalizing if it's still okay to enjoy their work, or if it's wrong to go on liking this thing that isn't as pure as you wished it was. In the case of Roman Polanski, his transgressions are so serious, are so awful, that they're impossible to ignore, and you have to grapple with them if you're ever going to see any of his movies, in the same way you'd have to grapple with Woody Allen's transgressions, or Michael Jackson's transgressions, or Jimmy Page's transgressions. Because to not do that would be to ignore the pain and the harm that they also put out into the world. When you think about it, it's unbelievably disgusting that Polanski was even able to make movies like The Ghost Rider. He was fleeing justice for sexually assaulting a girl, and yet he was able to have a flourishing 40-year career after that incident with incredibly skilled people supporting him the whole time. He even won an Academy Award for Best Director in 2003. Ewan McGregor and Pierce Brosnan are wonderful in this, but that doesn't mean they didn't lend their talent to something incredibly gross, something that could only exist because the director was escaping justice. For instance, most of the movie is set in Martha's Vineyard, which is in Massachusetts. And when I realized that Polanski had made this film, one of the first things that dawned on me was that this movie couldn't have actually been filmed there because Polanski wasn't allowed to step foot in America again. And sure enough, when I looked it up, the beach scenes in the movie were filmed in Germany. It's a film set in a country that the director wasn't legally permitted to set foot in, so he and everyone else on the crew had to go around it, and they all did. They all had no problem aiding and abetting this guy. It's not right. And if you are able to separate the art from the artist, then this might be a film for you. You might enjoy this. And by the way, for the most part, I don't judge people on the basis of what they will or will not watch, so long as you're not like a big Leni Riefenstahl fan or something. I think it's subjective. I think we all have totally different standards for what does or doesn't cross the line when it comes to entertainment. I think all of us have been fans of something that we don't know quite what to do with now because it has like an ethical asterisk attached to it. It's why these days I usually like to know as little as possible about the people who created the stuff I like. Ignorance is bliss sometimes. But if you can compartmentalize the work of a bad person, it's important to not excuse their transgressions. It's important to not be comfortable with someone's bad actions just because they made some stuff that you like, which is the mistake that many people make. I like The Ghostwriter. I think it's a good movie. But at the same time, I think it's essential to acknowledge that Roman Polanski should have been in prison instead of making this movie, and that no matter how good The Ghostwriter was, it can never transcend the fact that it shouldn't have existed in the first place. There's no amount of good that could have come from Polanski's work that could offset the fact that society was made worse because people like him were allowed to contribute to it, and that famous actors and directors and musicians made ethical concessions for him solely because he was good at what he did. Separating art from the artist should never mean the same thing as simply ignoring what the artist did, or ignoring the damage that they caused on their way to making something. Because to do that is to tolerate bad behavior. And tolerating bad behavior goes against the very nature of why art should exist in the first place.